Hello friends, welcome to this lecture of C++ programming. Friends, before going to learn the C++ basic language construct, it becomes very important to have the knowledge about certain hardware, because after knowing some basic computer hardware, we can have the knowledge grown at such a level that we can easily write the program with the aspect of how it will run on the computer hardware. So the basic architecture that we have to follow before learning the C++ language is somewhat what I am drawing here. See, when we talk about the computer, the first and the foremost component which is basically considered is CPU. And when we say CPU, it basically it is known as brain of computer. The idea of introducing CPU in computer is to execute a process. Remember, process. So CPU basically executes a process one at a time. And when I say one at a time, that means that likewise as the brain of a computer can think one at a time, in a similar way a CPU is also developed by a man according to his or her knowledge and the logic. So he or she has made the CPU in a way that that works something like the brain of a human being. That's why it basically can execute a process one at a time. And what we obtain when the CPU execute a process, we basically obtain some sort of output. This output can be of various things. If we write any programming language, the output can be in the form of executable file, which is of the extension .exe file, and it is in the form of machine language, which we call it by the name of object code. Secondly, if we want to give some request to CPU to display, you can say you want to hear some music, so you will basically start some sort of device, some sort of software, like for example MP3 or MP4. So you will give the request of starting the MP3 or MP4 to start the song, and the CPU execute your request as a process to give the output of playing music. So this is the output, and this output you basically obtain when CPU execute your request of playing the music as a process. Similarly, if you give some request to computer to print your page to printer, so the CPU will execute your request as a process to give the output of running the printer to obtain a printable page. So the basic idea is, whatever the request we basically give to the computer, the CPU basically it considers it as a process and execute your request as a process to give some output that you want. So the second idea that we have to consider, that what actually is the source of this process, that is, from which part of the computer this process basically comes from. So the answer is that there is another component which is very, very important, and this component is basically divided into small slots, and these slots basically contain lots of process. Say n processes are there, and These slots are basically considered as a cell whose basic unit is bit. And as you know that 8-bit makes up 1 byte and 4-bit makes up a nibble. So this component is basically known as main memory, which we know by the name of RAM, that is random access memory. So this component is very familiar with the users because main memory is basically is visible to all the computer users, and it is basically used to provide the storage area to each processes that is to be placed to the that is basically is to be submitted to CPU by operating system one at a time. So the idea is simple, that the process is placed in the main memory and that process is basically dispatched by the operating system, and that process is submitted at the same time by operating system one at a time to the CPU. Now the question is, what is the area of origin of this process? That is, from which component of the computer this process is coming from. So in order to know that component which basically does this that basically stores this process, we can consider that there is a virtual memory which we know by the name of hard disk. That is hard disk. And hard disk basically has several partitions there, out of which C partition is very important, because C partition is basically the collection of executable files. So these executable files means that these are the files that is required to be executed as a process by the CPU. So the idea is that whatever we give the request to the computer to perform some output, that request is stored as a file in C directory, and that file is loaded by operating system into main memory, and it converts the file into process. So it is basically the task of operating system to load the file into the main memory and convert it into the process. That process is going to be dispatched by the operating system's component into the CPU, and when CPU receives this process one at a time, it is going to execute it to provide you the desired output. So that is the idea of the basic architecture, and it is a very important understanding that we can observe all three components in a computer very easily. Fine. So we are going to discuss more about the details of it and how the computer programming architecture is important for understanding the C++ programming.